Hello, today I will be summarizing one of Plato's earlier dialogues, Gorgias, specifically the last part when Socrates argues with Callicles. So, for starters, let's paint a picture of what actually happens throughout Gorgias and what they talk about before Callicles. Socrates is walking with one of his students around Athens, and he runs into some other Athenians and starts to argue with them, since that's pretty much what he does. He argues with Polus, a famous rhetorician at that time, and tells him that unlike rhetorics, philosophy is concerned with finding the actual truth. What he's doing with rhetorics is merely creating false belief. Socrates argues that rhetoric is only good for people who intend to do wrong. You get a lot of people to do something for you, but you don't really improve anything. That's the gist of the first part, but what I'm going to be talking about is what comes after that. And who comes after that is none other than Callicles. Callicles believes in natural justice. He says that suffering wrong is worse than doing it. Everyone should take full advantage of the fact that some people are born richer than others. Wrongdoing is only wrong by human convention because we have laws that say it is wrong, and it's actually not wrong by nature. Callicles doesn't really like it when Socrates uses basic logic to destroy other people in arguments. He's okay with it when youngsters talk about philosophy and learn about it, but it's not something grown men should be doing. In the dialogue, he represents what most of the richer Athenians, the ones who ran things and could vote, thought of Socrates and of justice at that time. It is therefore no surprise that he was tried and sentenced to death no less than a year after the dialogue takes place. Socrates isn't really fazed at all by Callicles' emotional outpour and instead proposes they have a talk, since Callicles possesses the exact three qualities Socrates needs in an interlocutor: knowledge, goodwill, and frankness. And if they happen to come to a thing which they both agree upon, then that agreement between them will definitely be the truth. Callicles' idea of justice is natural justice. He gives the definition: the more powerful control the less and lead them with force. But then Socrates goes, oh, but what if a slave is stronger than his master? So Callicles has to change his definition to the better and the wiser rule over and possess more than the inferior. However, Socrates is not convinced by that and asks, are such leaders really in control of themselves? He introduces a new concept, temperance, and gives us two representations of the soul in the form of a jar analogy. A leaky jar, Callicles' jar, it is a soul with unrestrained desire, somebody who always wants more. And a full jar, Socrates' jar, it is the temperance of the soul and its desires, someone who is happy with what he has. Here Callicles points out that if the jar is full, then there is no more room for pleasure to be had. So what he's saying is that pleasure is what we should all strive for, the good. Socrates says that pleasure cannot be the good and gives us this example. If eating is pleasure and hunger is pain, then if we eat a banana, we are at the same time experiencing both pleasure and pain. However, a person cannot both be good and evil at the same time. Therefore, pleasure cannot be good and pain cannot be evil. Callicles agrees with that. Socrates defines an evil person as someone who does wrong and escapes punishment. He leads a shameful and wretched existence. He says that a sound-minded, temperate person is by definition also just, pious, brave, and therefore completely good and happy. Then he touches upon the question of how a good ruler should rule. He notes the importance of applying virtue and proper living to all aspects of one's city and citizens with the aim of making them as good as possible. Leaders often implement policy on the basis of pleasure, only for future generations to suffer from the eventual ills. So, for example, if we compare a bad ruler to a bad runner, if a runner were to sprint at the start of a long marathon, he wouldn't do too well. He would be in first place for a brief time, but then he would lose speed and probably finish last. The trouble is, says Socrates, that most of the rich Athenians act like this runner. They only look at the short-term benefits and not how it would long-term affect the future generations. At the end of the dialogue, Socrates gives us his theory on what happens when we die. The soul and the body separate, and a judgment is made concerning the good or evil of both. A beautiful body cannot disguise a wretched soul, and evil people receive a punishment. This is the best way of life, he says, to live and die in pursuit of righteousness and all other virtues. With the story of judgment and death, Plato accomplishes two goals. 1. Socrates had nothing to fear from death, since he lived according to the code of virtue. And 2. All tyrants and evil people will receive a punishment for their evil doings.